So there's a disclaimer. I will give you my opinion. This talk is going to be more about opinions and some other stuff. You know, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat under Part 91, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm not a flight instructor anymore, and I certainly don't know meteorology any better than you guys do, but I'll tell you what I know. I thought the joke at the bottom was kind of funny. So that quote on top is pretty interesting, and you know, it's funny, everybody has a different story. It's probably people like me who've been through the similar pipeline, and you guys that started out with GA know different things than I do. I call myself a 200-hour private pilot because I really am. I've got 175 hours in my airplane and about 25 before I first flew it. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a newbie in the GA world. So I grew up in Arizona. I went to Arizona State, graduated in '85. We made a deal with the dean, and I decided that if I left, he'd give me a degree. Joined the Navy, see the world, spent a lot of time in South Texas, as it turned out. As soon as I left the Navy, I went to United Airlines, and I'm currently there at this time. A little photo on the bottom. We did the Golden State Warriors, took a bunch of people to Boston. I guess they had a big game this last few weeks ago. So it's hard to read that thing at the bottom, but if anybody who's been in the Navy, that's something you might recognize. And it says, trying to sleep, and it says, let me play you the song of my people. So anyhow, that's a little military joke about what a needle gun sounds like when you're trying to take a nap. So when I started into this airplane thing, I wanted to fly the little airplane, and people would say to me, well, you already know everything you know because you do this for a living. And I thought, well, not really. I don't really know a lot of things. So to show you a little example of what I do at work and what I do when I get to go to my airplane. So at work, we always fly IFR. It doesn't matter how far you're going or whatever. Run an IFR flight plan. It's under tight control. There's really not a lot of, there's some negotiating to do, but you got to fit into the system. It's a different way to look. In GA, of course, I am always VFR, and I'm always VMC. That's my rule. At the airline, they're always high altitude. Weather's a big picture. If I can just top everything and go where I'm going, that's all I need to worry about. You go to the GA world, it's like a knife fight. You're down in the weeds, you're in the weather, you got to know what you're looking at and understand what it means to you. So that's a lot different. Destination weather at work is important. That's all I really care about. If I'm above Cat 3 minimums, I can auto land and everything's good. I walk back to the hotel and I'm done. A little different when you're flying a GA airplane. I've got a lot of support at work. I've got a dispatcher, I've got a load planner, I've got people that do everything for me. And it's a pretty easy job. That's a secret, by the way. I don't tell anybody. But you know, in the GA world, alone and afraid is what I would call that. So. At the airline, it's a multi-crew effort. I fly with help all the time. I've got somebody to back me up, work the crew coordination thing, and you know, when you're doing it by yourself, you're by yourself. We're a pretty high priority. When I come into an airport, the bigger airplane you are, the more priority you get, and you don't have to mess around. In the GA world, half the time I can't even raise ATC. Center doesn't want to talk to me. Who are you? Yeah, stand by if I get that. So it's a different way to go. And in the airline world, you know, as a captain, you approve and monitor. That's my job. I look at the plan, make sure it looks good, and make sure it goes to plan, and that's what I do. I took that picture. We were only going 280 knots indicated with a selfie, but that's not true. Little known fact, you can actually fly a 737 with the window open up to 250 knots. I've not tried that, but so in the GA world, you know, the priority, what you do is up to you as a PIC. You got to do it all: plan, review, update, evaluate. It's all you, and yeah, it's all you, Ferris. So the analogy I had was, in the airline world, it's like making bread with a bread machine. You throw it all in, you turn it on, you walk away, you come back, there's a loaf of bread. It's, you know, pretty easy. In the GA world, you walk out of the kitchen with flour in your face and eggs on the floor, you know, if you're not careful. So it's a different way to look at things. So I have a lot to learn, and I still am, and which has made it really fun. So the airplane, I built an RV7 a while ago. A lot of people have seen it. This is some of the stats on it. It's an IL360. It does have Dynon stuff in it. It's got an autopilot. It's night capable. It's VFR only. I don't fly in the weather in this airplane. That's my choice. It does have, root capabilities and all kinds of other nifty stuff. The backup I use is this Samsung tablet. And so I've got one HDX display and then a Samsung tablet that I use for some other stuff I should talk to you guys about later. Let's see, and I do have onboard oxygen. I carry that O2 bottle, which has turned out to be a really great thing. I'll talk about that a little more later. That's the flight deck. So simple. It's pretty simple, really. And if you like glass, it works really well. The Dynon's on the left, that little tablet's in a RAM mount on the right. Allows me to have a backup for navigation, and it also allows me to do flight planning away from the airplane. And it seems to work out pretty well. Ken talked me into that one. He said, "You know all of that?" I said, "No way." So the mission that I set up for myself, I'd done a couple of cross countries down to Moab, Utah, where one of my sons lives, and this one was going to be a longer one down to Austin. It turned out to be 3,600 miles, I think is about what it came down to. Show the family the airplane, learn more about this cross country thing, and see the country from down low. Turned out to be a great trip. So route of flight that I did, kind of went from here to Caldwell, Idaho, a great place near Boise that has a fantastic little restaurant for breakfast. And then I moved on to Moab, Utah, there just south of Salt Lake City, and spent the night. And from there went to Littlefield, Texas, which is the flattest place on the face of the earth. And then down to Hank Sasser Breakaway Airport, which is where I spent about a week. So I found somebody down there who volunteered to loan me their hangar. Had a nice place to keep my airplane. It worked out really good. On the way back, I headed north, and I've got family in Denver. So I flew back up to Littlefield, and then up to Arapahoe County, which is Centennial Airport. Spent the night there, and then headed on home. Intending to go from Centennial to Blackfoot, Idaho, at McCarley Field, and then straight on home. And I was going to stop in Othello for gas, and just like somebody was saying, the card reader wasn't working, and guess what? Everybody piled on down to Tri-Cities to get some fuel, so that turned out to be a little lesson in flexibility. I don't run into that at work so much. So a bunch of details, flight times, everything, but like I said, it turned out to be, I don't know if that's on there, 3,600 miles or about. So this is what I had to do when I stepped into the GA world. I had to come up with my own rules to fly by. At work, I got a book, and it tells you this is how to operate. Keeps everybody out of trouble, keeps everybody on the same page. It works pretty well for the airline industry. But here, I had to come up with my own stuff. So I'm BMC at all times, and I don't play with ice. I've done that in the military in the Cascades, and it scares me to death. So I've seen huge chunks of ice on airplanes. I'm not going there. I used to joke around when people said, IFR means I follow roads. I kind of giggled and laughed. Well, I'll tell you what, I follow roads now. So mostly because I want a place I can go at least ditch the airplane and have somebody drive by in the next hour or so. So there's a lot of advantages to it. This is my philosophy. Always having a good VFR alternate in mind, and when I talk my way through this flight I did, you'll see some examples of that. Winds are important, more than they are at work. I can always power my way through winds or fly over them, or just ignore it, but for the most part, they make a big difference in this world. So turbulence can be important there. When I'm VFR over the top, which I try not to do much because it kind of keeps you from doing a nice glide down to some place to land, I want to make sure that I can get down without going through icing, and that I've got terrain clearance underneath so I don't pop out in the rocks. I like an airport that's 1,500 feet long if I can, and paved if I can get it. And crossing mountainous areas, that 1,500 foot rule. A lot of people know more about mountain flying than I do, but that's kind of a minimum. When you start getting down low in the wind, you can get whacked pretty hard. So I've learned that. I always file a VFR flight plan, and I like to stay in contact with controllers, which when I first started doing this, I thought, this will be nice, it'll be nice and quiet, I won't have to talk to anybody. I did about 3 legs, and I said, this is making me uncomfortable. So over 37 years, I've learned that I like having somebody in my ear, apparently, And even if I'm just listening, I know I've got radio comms. If I got a problem, I can call somebody up. So that's how I approach it. This particular airplane, 9.5 to 12.5 thousand feet, works really nice. And if you go up high at all, as a matter of fact, above 10, that O2 really matters quite a bit. I burn about 8 to 8.5 gallons an hour. I'll get about 170 knots true in reality, and I file for 160 to give myself some slack. I like to land with 10 gallons. Max leg I can stand is about 3 hours. And like I said, that O2, that system right there, that bottle will last me 15 to 18 hours. So that's turned out to be a really great addition to the airplane. So for this trip, my weather plan was to chase a cold front. Everybody should be going, what is he thinking there? But in March, just getting out of here and heading out to the good weather is kind of hard to do. So that cold front was coming through. It was nice weather behind. I thought I'd just chase it on down, which worked out pretty well. Stayed behind it just a little bit, so that I didn't get stuck in any snow or anything like that. I did plan a westerly approach into Moab because that front was going to be coming in there, and I gave myself a little bit of space to follow it in. I had a couple of airports I could drop into in case it didn't move as fast as it should have, which it did not. So I ended up catching the front, basically is what was happening on this trip. And discovered, as you can see in that photo, it's still winter in lots of Idaho and Utah and places in March. So a few lessons learned. So this is an Aviation Weather Center surface analysis diagram you can pull up anytime. It's one of the ones I use. This was early in the morning, the day of departure. Not looking so great there, but as you went in further into the day, that front was starting to push some of that precipitation out. And as soon as I could get out of here, which was the first challenge, the rest of it went pretty good. So I made my way down and had a lot of broken clouds and some stratus through the mountains, but for the most part, the weather was pretty good and pretty good rides. So that was the first route. If you guys don't use FlightAware, this is a FlightAware display. It's fun to look at. You can go back and look at what you did that day or get your flight times or whatever. The green line is altitude, the yellow line is airspeed. So if you look at the flight from here to Caldwell, pretty constant altitude, pretty smooth airspeed line. From Caldwell down to Moab with the westerly approach that I had to do, and some of the weather is showing up there. You'll notice that yellow line is not smooth because it was bumpy, let me tell you. So that's the whole thing about, this flying down low. A little bit of weather can make a big difference as far as rides go. I snuck my way in through the back door from to head into Moab. I went by Fillmore, if you're familiar with that. Fillmore was kind of my bailout point to behind me. And so my theory was, if I moved into the front and got too close, the weather got bad, I'm just turning around and I'm just heading back to Fillmore and spend the night there if I can't make it to Moab. Well, I pushed in through Fillmore, kind of shot through a little space in the mountains, maybe had 3,000 feet of clearance, a little bit less. And as soon as I dropped in there and got a little bit closer, I was catching up to the front. It started snowing up north of me, it was getting a little bit dark, weathers were getting a little bit taller. I turned right and I went down towards Richfield, thinking there's another good airport to land at. It's in the valley just to the west, or just to the east. And at that point I said, I got two choices, stay in Richfield, or I can climb up through a nice big slot. And I went up to 13.5, a little bit south, hopped over the weather and raced in front of the front to get to Moab. That's how that worked out. Worked out okay. Probably pushing it a little more than I intended to begin with. So once I got to Moab, then it was time to go out down to destination. That was real early morning weather, and you can see it's wintry just east of Moab. That front is right there. The white is snow. But as the day went on, front moved. Looked like it was going to work pretty well. So heading down to Littlefield, another jagged yellow line and a lot of altitude changes. So in this day, I was hoping to go to about Durango, a little bit south of Durango, and just kind of cut through the passes and head over to Littlefield. No way. The mountains that are just south and east of Durango were basically the same height as the cloud decks that were there. So I headed south towards Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and right about there I could cut through Las Vegas, New Mexico area where it was snowing again, but stay in BMC. Cut through a little pass, I don't remember the name of the highway, and that took me through to clear air there in New Mexico on into Littlefield. But bumpy ride, there was a lot of work to do there. Once I got to Littlefield and headed south, everything went good. As a matter of fact, on that leg from Littlefield down to Austin, I had about a 240 knot ground speed with a nice tailwind, about at 12 or so. So at Breakaway Airfield, lay over there, visiting family, taking people for flights, enjoyed that quite a bit. Great hosting and great airfield. A little bit of a narrow runway with nice big stanchions on the side, so always paying attention to that runway. But spent a few days there and was hosted inside of a nice hangar to myself, so the airplane was in good shape. Once we left for left Breakaway, the weather that morning on the 6th was high pressures all the way from northern New Mexico, as you can see, and then all the way back up towards home. So thinking that would be a good plan. Later in the day scheduled to stay about the same or slightly improve. And so off I went. So first stop there was back to Littlefield. Once again, just a straight shot, get up there for fuel, and the next stop after that was planned for Arapahoe at Centennial near Denver. So once again, heading up towards Littlefield, bumpy rides. It got worse as I made my way along, and then after the fuel stop in Littlefield, up towards Arapahoe. Clear skies, VFR weather was super nice, but a lot of wind and a lot of bumps. So it ended up being a very choppy flight going into Centennial. As it turned out on landing, looks like the winds were out of the west. They cleared me for an approach to the north runway. I asked them to go ahead and use that short runway to the east-west, and winds were 25 gusting to 35, so that worked out fine. As it turned out, a couple airplanes behind me also took that choice as well. So layover in Centennial overnight, visiting some family there as well, and then the next day, once again, high pressure all the way back home. That was my plan. That's 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. And then later in the day, also expected to be good weather. So off I went, headed north out of Denver, north out of Arapahoe up to the east side of the Denver Class Bravo, west side of Class Bravo airspace in Denver. And once I got up north to the point where I could get across the northern Rockies, then made my left turn and headed over towards my first stop, which was going to be Othello, Washington. And as it turned out, let's see, Othello, it's actually Blackfoot. Arapahoe to Blackfoot was my first stop, so that worked out fine. Stopped there for gas. Still a bumpy day. The weather, as it turned out, with the high pressure, since it wasn't one big high, caused a lot of choppy air. So not the best ride. A lot of high altitude elevation, 11.5 and more, but because the terrain was so high there, a lot of the MSL or the AGL altitudes are down around 1,500 to 2,000 feet. So that contributed to the bumps. Higher is better over there when you have winds down low, as it turns out. So from Blackfoot, my plan was to stop at Othello, and I did. So right over towards Boise and then up the way. Ride started to smooth out, winds dropped off, and turned out to be a pretty nice ride. The only problem with that was I got up to Othello, and it turns out the fuel pump wasn't working, so a little flexibility, a little extra fuel on board helped. Called off a couple airplanes inbound looking for cheap gas as well, and we all headed down towards Pasco. So unplanned fuel stop in Pasco, and then after that, Pasco heading back home. Nothing particular on that flight. Rides are smoothing out, everything's getting better, and turned out to be a nice ride heading back home. So mission accomplished. Beautiful day when I got back home, of course, and the adventure was basically over. Let's go on to next adventures. I was hoping to go to AirVenture, which in hindsight I did, and I was hoping to go to Kamloops, which in hindsight I also did, and then I'm still looking for a place to head down south this fall, and it looks like I may be down to Cottage Grove in Oregon. So with good gas prices and some weather, that'll be the plan. This is my approach to flight planning, and it's kind of the low cost, my cheap approach. All my apps and sites are whatever's free to the public, stuff you've already paid for, government supplied, that sort of thing. I do all my planning and flying en route on an Android device, or I use my PC at home. All my, with Leidos and the flight plan activation, I do via phone and text. That works out pretty nice. Really no need to talk to briefers too much anymore, unless you have any questions about something. So that works out really well. My backup nav charts and maps are on my Android aboard the aircraft, and real-time weather that I get from Dynon is supplied via ADSB and that sort of setup. So that's my system and how I use it. Some planning tips that you can take on board if you like. I do all my planning prior to taking off, including some other routes. So sometimes if you have a thought that maybe weather's not going to work out, it's really easy to plan and have your flight plan standing by. You can even file it and then activate it later when you decide which way you want to go. ETAs, I tend to add a little extra time en route, so flight service or Leidos is not calling you up to find out why you haven't closed your flight plan, since sometimes contacting a flight service in the air can be difficult. So that gives me a little bit of space. Extra 10 minutes doesn't hurt, I don't think. Getting those updated weather briefings, once again, really easy to do online. And if you take a snapshot of whatever your filed flight plan is, I can just pull that up on my tablet and be able to review my route and even the weather brief en route to know what I was briefed on. Once again, closing your flight plan immediately is available on text, and you don't even have to make a call, and they don't have to call you. So some of the flight planning assets that I use, flight service is the 1-800-weatherbrief.com. It's online, and that's you can do all your filing, get all your weather information and TFRs, that sort of stuff. It's all available right there with a good brief. Aviation Weather Center is where I get my information from. As far as the weather goes, these diagrams, photographs or pictures you saw of what the weather synopsis was and that type of thing all comes from there. Airnav.com will give you fuel at various areas. You can also check it en route and plan a trip, and it'll give you advised routes for the best fuel prices for your stops. More information about flight service when it comes time to file. You can set up your account with your default aircraft. Simply under plan and brief, you can choose your origin and destination, add your distance and stops that you like to use, and then once you've found your suitable stops, you can check fuel prices, modify the route as required, and then go back over and modify your plan, check the fuel and the time, and go again from there. Last comment is lots of routes, as it turns out, will fly through MOAs. As long as you have the fuel to go around them, frequently you can talk to flight following and get the status of the MOA. And if it's cold, you can certainly go through the MOA. You're allowed to anyhow, but responsibly I think it's nice to stay clear. If they clear you through a MOA because it's not active, that certainly can save you a lot of time and distance. And or I've even had times in the Salt Lake area where they've actually worked me through an active MOA, just advising other aircraft to where you are and keeping you clear. So that works out really well. Flight plan, flight service stuff, as far as entering information for your flight plan itself. VFR is what I fly in a flight rule. The flight type, I use a G or a Gulf type. You can view airport data independently for each airport along the way, and it'll give you a brief on that. It'll also evaluate departure times. If you hit the evaluate button, it'll give you weather trends as the day moves on, so you may be able to adjust your departure times to fit that the best. Under altitude, there's also an optimize button, and that'll give you fuel use for each flight level that you might use, so you can pick the best one that fits your plan. And under estimated estimated time en route, once again, that'll also calculate that for you and give what it recommends as your best flight time for en route. Aviation Weather Center, this could be a talk in itself for sure. There's a lot of information there, but like I said, once you learn how to use it, surface progs are nice, all your destination TAFs and METARs are good. You can get a lot of en route weather out of this thing. You pretty much get everything you need, including winds. So that's a great website. Couple of other things I use, so back to my do it for free or cheap. Avare is one of the pieces of software you can run on a tablet, an Android tablet, and this is what's up right now. So that's basically a sectional chart, moving map, all the information. Everything you find in an airport directory is on Avare, and it's free. So I'll take that now and then, you're ready to go, including approach charts, airport diagrams, everything you pay for elsewhere. It's free because it's government information.
Does it include Canada?
I don't know. I'll find out when I try to do the Kamloops. Yeah.
And do you need like cellular service to use that?
You don't, because, so here's the limitation. If you don't have a data plan, you'll download your weather ahead of time and it will hold that weather. In other words, it'll keep the forecast and the stuff you have, but it will never update. So if you've got a tablet with a data plan, it'll be full speed, it'll just update, you'll have real-time information. I get the real-time from my Dynon system. Yeah.
Does Avare connect into the ADSB data streams from the Dynon?
It does. So it uses Bluetooth. It Bluetooths over to the Dynon and it passes that information along, which I find confusing, so I don't generally use it. So the only thing that it won't do is I'll do my flight planning on that tablet. I cannot transfer that to Dynon. So Dynon's made the deal with Apple and said, or Seattle Avionics, I think, that says you have to use that provider to move flight plans. But if you look at the way my flight plans are, they tend to be pretty simple. And I just hand type them in by Dynon and let it follow the magenta line. That's how I use that. And then FlightAware, good for reviewing stuff. I know there's people that follow me on that, follow different people, it's kind of fun. And that's AirNav, if you've not used that before, shows local fuel prices. There's a couple of caveats in there, but it's right on, it's a regular website. Put in the destination, it'll give you a radius to give you fuel prices. Pick the kind of fuel you want and try to pick 30 days. It used to be you could put in there whatever the fuel price was the last couple of years, it'll be right, and it ain't right anymore. So 30 days, things change a lot. So go to 30 days, click it, and you'll get a whole list of airports. So not only is this one of those, where's the cheap fuel, but it tells you a lot about the airports in the area. If you're going to someplace you haven't been before, there's a nice list of airports around who have fuel. I'll screenshot that, and if I go into a destination and Othello was closed, I just pulled it back up and said, okay, who's got the next closest place with decent fuel? Went to Pasco. So,
Did you say you went into a place the card reader was broke, or you broke your card?
I didn't break it.
So does this have those updates on that kind of stuff?
No, it does not. Although you can update it. I don't know who you have to be, but you can put updates in and say, yeah, just like Anacortes right now should say unavailable or something.
Yeah.
I doubt if it will.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
One thing I found really helpful is calling the airport and asking them, if there's any problems with the fuel or.
Good idea, especially if it's like your only choice or something. Yeah. It's a remarkable number of airports in the world or across the U.S., that's for sure. So some motherhood at the end. This is kind of stuff I think about when I'm going as far as cross country goes. I always carry basic survival stuff. If I got to spend the night in my airplane, I'm not be freezing to death. So I'll bring that kind of stuff. I do carry a medical kit. This PLB that I'm talking about, I have a Zoleo, which I should have carried in. It's just a little gadget you can put in your pocket. It's a satellite locator. So it's got the come help me button if you want to use that. And this particular one, you can connect to your phone. You can send text messages and stuff, which means I can close my flight plan. So not only my wife knows where I'm at, and the FAA is not looking for me again. Tie downs, chocks, standard repair kit. The O2 system with the pulse oximeter, or pulse oximeter. Like I said, this one I asked a moment ago is a pulse system, so it senses when you breathe in. It gives you a short blip of oxygen. You can set it at different levels. It works really, really nice.
Where do you keep that in your airplane?
It's mounted on that center post, basically behind the seats, where the where the flap actuator lives on an RV7.
So you turn it on and then it won't, no oxygen will flow unless you have it.
Correct. That's the other nice thing. It's not easy to reach, so I just turn around and I turn it on before I get in the plane. And until you start using it, it doesn't.
How long do you get out of it, Bob?
15 to 18 hours at an equivalent of 2 liters per hour. So it's about $300 for the system, I would say.
Very good.
The old ones, I think people didn't like them because you had to breathe in hard to get them to trigger. And this thing is super sensitive. You forget you have it on. And I'll put the little pulse oximeter on my finger just to see how I'm doing. And without it, you'll start dropping down into the 80s, which I know is not where you want to be.
No.
And you put that thing on, and you're right back up to the 190, 95.
Doesn't the efficiency drop with altitude? Like you don't get as many hours
You
out
would
of it?
think so. Well, they call it 2 liters per hour or minute equivalent. I have no idea what that means, and I did not find that to be the case. I've had it as high as 13.5, and that's kind of 14 is kind of awesome.
I think between 10 and 13.5 is not a significant difference.
I don't think so.
Because I think higher it does use more.
I imagine it will. So, and if you read the manual, it says not for use above 10,000 feet. Because it's made for its ambulatory oxygen system, so it's not made for that. But it works great. So feel free to check that out. Food and water, of course, in a lemonade bottle. If you don't know what that's for, then we can talk about it.
Don't get them mixed
If you
up.
find a half full lemonade bottle there, don't take a drink. So, some really great sceneries I made a way across on this trip. So, my summary, make a plan, do your homework, keep an eye on the weather and the fuel, of course, just the standard stuff, and be flexible. A lot of places and I don't know where I learned this, but when you're cruising down a canyon and the weather's not looking so good, it's not a bad idea to just kind of peek over your shoulder every once in a while and go, all right, I got a place to go. And if you're able to do that, you have a good time and enjoy it. So that's pretty much it.